Chapter 21. Maybe he and Vita got separated. Maybe he got back on the train. Jaime tried to comfort his cousin, but he didn't believe his words any more than she did. A gut feeling told him Zavi was gone, like Miguel, forever. I'll go look for him if you'd like, he said. Vita can help me. No, don't leave me. Angela clung to his arm. He nodded. He didn't want to leave her either. He stood up and stared into the horizon as he had to find Angela. Zavi, Jaime called out. Zavi! He paused, listening to the quiet surrounding them. Nothing. He might still show up, but he didn't. Finally, Jaime put his arm around her shoulder, letting her cry on him like he'd cried on her. I'm sorry. I liked him too. I know how you feel. Angela stopped crying and snapped. What do you know? I've lost a boyfriend and a brother. You still have your brother. Her words stung. For a moment, the anger and resentment he had felt yesterday flooded back. Then he remembered how lost he'd felt last night, all alone. Now was not the time to argue with her, no matter how much they were both hurting. Still, he let go of her to look her straight in the eye. Miguel was like my twin, a part of me that is gone forever. Don't ever think I loved him less because we had different parents. Jaime looked at the east. The sun was fully up and threatened to be hotter than yesterday, yet the cold from the night before still chilled his bones. We didn't know Zavi for very long, he continued, but he was always there for us, like family. There was still a chance Zavi would come back, right? Unless they found proof. There was no way of knowing if he was truly gone. Jaime remembered Miguel in his coffin. As horrible as it had been to see his cousin like that, at least there were no questions of his death. With Zavi, nothing was certain, and Jaime didn't know if that was worse. But last night, when I thought I'd never see you again, I didn't know if I could go on. Even if Miguel helps me, like I think he did last night, I can't do this trip without you. Angela collapsed into his arms. They hadn't had anything to drink since yesterday, and still her body seemed to have an endless supply of tears. After several minutes, her breaths were more chokes. I'm so scared. I know. Me too. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. I barely felt the pain in my ankle last night. I was worried I'd never see you again. You almost didn't. He told her about the truck chasing him and getting stuck in the animal den. She told him how she twisted her ankle in a rabbit hole and then had lain flat on the ground, praying the bush and grass would hide her if the trucks returned. She yanked up a handful of brittle grass before throwing it to the side. I'm going to end up like Tia, barely able to work, having to depend on others to take care of me. Jaime pressed his lips together. His mama might have a limp, but she wasn't helpless. Mama doesn't depend on anyone. She can take care of herself and everyone else. You know that. How dare Angela suggest that being like Mama was anything to be ashamed of, that she was less of a person because she couldn't run well, when Mama had raised Angela like her own. Stop acting like your life is a telenovela. Angela stared at the dusty ground and then around the vast landscape. I think we should go back. With no sign of civilization between the scraggly bushes, not even a cow grazing or a rabbit searching for a nibble, Angela had finally spoken some sense. Yeah, the train tracks are our best hope to head north, he said. No, back home, to Guatemala. What? Jaime jumped to his feet and glared at his cousin. It was one thing to think these thoughts, but to say them out loud? Angela hugged the knee of her good leg to her chest. I'm tired of being scared all the time. I miss my parents and abuela. I want to hang out with mis amigas. I want to bathe and I want a bath and regular meals. I want things to go back to how they were. More than anything, he wanted those things too. He hated that even here, thousands of kilometers away, the Alphas were still controlling their lives. He kneeled next to her. You know we can't go back. Things will never be the same. But they'd be better than this here, in the middle of nowhere. She lifted her head, her dark eyes turned wild. I've been thinking, it won't be that hard. We turn ourselves into La Migra, and they'll load us on a bus back home. Jaime couldn't believe his ears. This wasn't Angela. Angela took care of everyone. She told everyone what to do and how to do it, but she wasn't a person who gave up. They'd seen how La Migra had treated that Salvadoran lady on the bus. What about everything they didn't see? There was no guarantee that La Migra had even taken her back to the Mexico-Guatemala border. But the Alphas, he reminded her, they're sure to make us pay for fleeing. If they killed Miguel for refusing to join, what will they do to us? Angela gulped and turned away. Maybe it won't be so bad. Manny Boy is in the gang, and we used to be friends. Maybe he can even soften the blows. Manny Boy? Jaime swallowed a snort. Please. He remembered when Manny Boy and Angela were friends. They were 8, and Manny Boy would chase her around the schoolyard trying to kiss her while Angela screamed for him to stop. Really screamed, not teasing, playful screams. Jaime didn't want to think how Manny Boy would behave now. "We can't go home. You know that," he said. A new determination surged through his body. They were going to continue, or die trying. No giving up. Normally, he was happy to let her make the choices, but this was the best decision he wasn't going to let her make. This was one decision he wasn't going to let her make. Time to be strong and brave, like Miguel. I miss La Familia too, but it's for them. We have to keep going. What would Tio say if you joined the gang that killed your brother? Angela turned away. He lifted her chin so he could look right into her eyes. He had to make her understand. If we don't make it, then Miguel died for nothing. Angela shook her head. "But it's hopeless. I can't walk. I'll never be able to get back on the train." Jaime crossed his arms over his chest and used the same glare both of their madres had gotten from Abuela. "But you think you can walk to Meeker Station? There's nothing out here. We're in the Chihuahua Desert. No one's going to find us until our bones are bleached by the sun, and I'm not going to let that happen. But nada." There was no way he could have saved Miguel. He understood that now. But as long as their hearts continued to beat, he wasn't giving up on her. "You can't always be the boss. I'm in charge now, and I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to help you. We're going to keep heading north, even if I have to carry you on my back like a burro." Angela's shoulders dropped as she let out a deep breath. Finally, she nodded. "Come on, let's get back to the tracks." Jaime stood up first and then offered a hand to his cousin. Angela got up slowly, but scrunched her eyes in pain the second she put weight on the ankle. This time, she didn't give up and fall to the ground. Jaime put his arm around her waist for support. By stepping on the ball of her foot, Angela managed to stagger a bit. Without Jaime, though, she wouldn't have been able to do more than hop. It took forever to get back to the tracks. While Vita trotted ahead of them, her paws barely touching the railroad ties, Jaime tried his hardest not to show how tired he was. He couldn't let her down. Angela didn't complain once, just did what he said. Miguel would have been proud of both of them. They hobbled along while keeping an ear out for the next train. It could come in a few minutes or a few days. If it came in a few minutes, it'd be nearly impossible to board it. If it came in a few days, they could be dead. As they walked, he searched for something that might help them survive in the semi-desert. He didn't have Vita's nose. The fresh, unpolluted air was more a non-smell than a scent. There was no obvious water nearby. He figured if there were, there'd be clusters of trees and greener shades of brown huddled around the water source. Maybe even the scent of moisture. Instead, his nose itched with sunburn and dust. There were various plants beside the patchy grass, shrubby brushes, and prickly cactus, plants with little purple flowers and a cluster of spines with flower stalk jutting high up in the middle. But he had no idea if any were edible. None of them looked the least bit appetizing. Occasionally, a plastic water bottle lay near the tracks, dirty, cracked, and bone dry, and there was no shelter where they could rest and escape the scorching sun. "We'll keep following the tracks," Jaime said, breaking the silence to keep optimistic. Maybe there's a sharp turn where the train slows down enough to hop on. But realistically, he didn't see how that would work. His determination to do or die seemed seeped away. Even if the train slowed to a crawl, climbing a ladder to the top of a boxcar with only one leg would require a lot of arm strength for Angela. And he didn't even want to think of how they would get off the train if Los Fuegos came back. The intense sun continued to beat down on them. It was past midday when a rutted dirt road crossed over the tracks. Vita retracted her tongue, which had practically been hanging to the ground, as her nose twitched down the road. Jaime kicked the dust under his shoes and blinked his sore eyes. Was that? In the far-off distance, he could just make out a structure. The dry heat evaporated most of their sweat, but beads rolled down his forehead and drenched the areas where their arms were around each other. White salt stains appeared under their armpits. He was so thirsty, it surprised him that they had any fluids left to sweat. "Is that a house, or are my eyes playing tricks on me?" Angela squinted down the dusty road as she panted. "It's a building of some sort," he confirmed. "Let's check it out. Maybe there's water." She leaned against him to catch her breath. What if that's Los Fuegos' headquarters? Jaime licked his chapped lips and took a deep breath. Then "Let's pray they're sleeping," and left the keys in the truck. It was a joke, but better to think about that than the more realistic truth. They had no other choice. They wouldn't survive another hour under this sun. They dragged their feet to the house that slowly grew closer. It was a mobile home, rooted securely to the ground with an added wooden porch and 4 times the size of Jaime's two-room house. There was a truck parked in front, but instead of being sleek with oversized tires like the ones Los Fuegos drove, this one was battered and scratched, a result of many years as a farm vehicle. Jaime didn't get close enough to check for keys in the ignition. A cow pasture stood half a football pitch away from the front door. On the side closest to the rutted track stood a metal cattle trough, water. Jaime stepped on a strand of barbed wire and helped Angela through the gap without getting snagged before ducking through himself. For a few seconds, they stared at the half-filled trough. A quick glance around confirmed no water spigot nearby. Slimy green and buzzing with flies, the water smelled as appetizing as sewage. Still, it was better than nothing. Vita didn't hesitate to lap up the muddy water that had seeped out underneath. "What are you two doing? Get out of here!" A slender woman appeared at the front door a second before they plunged their hands into the water. She carried a long hunting rifle. "Excuse us, Effa!" Jaime used the term of respect he knew Mexicans liked. "Could we please have some of your cow's water? We've been walking for hours and have nothing to drink." "We'll leave in a second and not bother you again," Angela added as she hopped in place to keep her balance. From inside the house, a baby started crying. The woman groaned at the sound and lowered the rifle. "Come here, and I'll get you some clean water. That water there is not even fit for the cows. I've been telling my husband to clean that trough for months." They hobbled toward her wooden porch, straining to climb the 2 steps and too tired and thirsty to be cautious. They sat on the covered porch, not wanting to intrude in her home. The crying came from not one, but 2 babies, who'd just woken up. The woman seemed torn between letting go her rifle and seeing to the twins. Still, she set down a large jug filled with water and cups, followed by a plate of vanilla cream cookies and painkillers for Angela before returning to the fussing babies. They drained the jug and devoured the cookies in seconds. A stitch in Jaime's stomach told him he probably shouldn't have ingested so much so fast. We should leave, Jaime thought, but it felt nice sitting on the folding chair, massaged his stomach out of the hot sun. If only he dared take off his shoes, but he'd be perfectly happy. "Thank you for your hospitality," he called into the house as Angela swallowed the painkillers. "Is there any way we can repay you?" "Yes," Angela agreed. She didn't seem willing to leave either. "I can change the babies or play with them if you'd like." The woman reappeared, bouncing the crying twins on her hips. She stared at Jaime and Angela as if they were trying to trick her in some way until she finally nodded. "How are you, boy?" with a hammer. Jaime straightened up, trying to look important and trustworthy. Any fatigue he was feeling, he hid in his enthusiasm. "I helped my papa fix the roof last year." She used her chin to point to the cow pasture in front of the house. "That gate is falling off and my husband hasn't had the time to fix it." "Do you have any tools?" he asked. The woman handed him a hammer and a paper bag of nails before rounding on Angela. "You, go clean yourself up before handling my babies. There's plenty of soap in the bathroom. You can do the same, boy, once you're done outside." He wasn't a carpenter or an engineer, and it took him double the length of time it would have taken someone who knew what they were doing. But in the end, he got the gate fixed. The woman, Senora Perez, as she asked them to call her, didn't mind the time it took and had another task for him once he finished. They spent the rest of the day doing various jobs around the ranch house. Not only did Jaime fix the gate, but he tacked the roofing paper on the chicken coop and cleaned the cattle's disgusting water trough. The smell from it curled his insides. Thank goodness they hadn't had to drink it. Angela likewise kept busy, changing the twins, putting them to sleep, and washing their diapers. Even Vita did her part by catching a rabbit that went into a stew. The thought that Senor Perez was going to keep them as slaves crossed Jaime's mind. It was possible. They'd done more work than the water and the cookies were worth, and she never praised them. On the other hand, he didn't mind too much. It was nice feeling useful and not being on the run, like he was worth something. As the sun set, Senor Perez fed them homemade bread, slathered with butter, and finished the rabbit stew, by far the healthiest, heartiest, and most flavorful thing they'd eaten during the whole journey. Why did they need to continue traveling? It took so long. Surely this woman would let them stay and work for her in exchange for room and board. She didn't talk much, but she seemed fair and maybe even nice. The floor creaked under their feet as they washed the dishes, but the rest of Senora Perez's kitchen was elaborate. She had a refrigerator as tall as Jaime and even a microwave. Next to the kitchen were worn but comfy-looking couches and a TV with a combination VCR and DVD player. Down the hall, there were 2 bedrooms and an indoor bathroom. He'd never been in a mobile home before. They weren't safe in Guatemala with all the hurricanes and had no idea how nice they were. It also helped that the walls were covered with photographs of the twins and the rest of the family. It felt like a home. While Senora Perez bottle-fed the babies, she looked around the clean house and fixed outdoor structures. Her tired face cracked into a smile. "I'm glad you came. You hear these stories about immigrants robbing and sometimes even killing the residents. We hear the same thing about the locals. A sad smile crossed Angela's face as she gave the counters a final wipe. Like her, Jaime still couldn't accept that Zavi was gone. Senor Perez handed them the bottles to wash and picked up the two babies. She stood rocking them, her mouth twisted as if she were debating something. After a few minutes, she took a deep breath. I need to pick up my husband near Ciudad Juarez. He drove a bunch of cabs up to El Norte and has to return the trailer to another rancher. It's about a 3-hour drive. Do you want me to drop you off along the way? I assume you're trying to cross. Gracias, they said together. They couldn't believe their luck. It was more than they could ever have hoped for. No more trains, no more traveling across Mexico. From Ciudad Juarez, they would be able to see Los Estados Unidos. Now, they just had to cross the border to Tomas.